to the Country Watch Political Intelligence Briefing Quick Hits, a weekly briefing of hot stories across the world in brief. I'm Denise Youngblood-Coleman, the Chief Editorial Officer and Senior International Affairs Analyst at Country Watch. This week I continue to be focused on the crisis on the border with Ukraine. On February 11, 2022, United States National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan took to the podium at the daily press briefing at the White House to issue a stark warning about the crisis in Ukraine. The National Security Advisor said that the United States believed that Russian President Vladimir Putin could order an invasion of Ukraine at any time. Sullivan declared, "We're in the window when an invasion could begin at any time." National Security Advisor Sullivan emphasized that a prospective Russian invasion of Ukraine could commence with an air assault. He added that Putin would be undeterred by the Beijing Olympics and could order that invasion before the end of the Games of the Olympiad on February 20th, 2022. National Security Advisor Sullivan also urged Americans in Ukraine to depart the country within 24 to 48 hours. He warned of the risk they incurred in remaining in Ukraine, saying, "If you stay, you're assuming risk with no guarantee that there will be any other opportunity to leave and no prospect of a U.S. military evacuation." National Security Advisor Sullivan's warning came in the days after vigorous diplomatic overtures by French President Emmanuel Macron to Russian President Vladimir Putin in Moscow. It also occurred at a time when Russia was conducting military drills in Belarus. These two events, in conjunction with Sullivan's press briefing, illustrated fast-moving developments in Europe as regards the Ukrainian crisis. According to Sullivan, following conversations with United States President Joe Biden, there was also a sense of solidarity among allied countries. Canadian President Justin Trudeau, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, French President Emmanuel Macron all reaffirmed the need for formidable consequences for Russia should it invade Ukraine. Those consequences would likely come in the form of harsh sanctions targeting Russia's financial and energy sectors. Among National Security Advisor Sullivan's sobering assertions was that Russia could take control of significant Ukrainian territory. That being said, taking control of foreign territory is not the same thing as occupying foreign territory. It was thus unclear what type of landscape would transpire in the event of that type of invasion of Ukraine's sovereignty. Sullivan said that the United States was prepared for all possibilities. He declared, "We are ready either way." Whether the National Security Advisor referenced the readiness factor, though, it was not in conjunction with the United States or NATO forces going to war with Russia over Ukraine. It was fixed on the central goal of defending NATO allies. Several days later, there were further developments when, after talks between Russian President Vladimir Putin and German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, Russia claimed it was partially pulling back from the border with Ukraine. On the same day, United States President Joe Biden warned that a Russian invasion of Ukraine was still possible. President Biden said that Russian forces remained very much in a threatening position. The Russian Defense Ministry had announced that some forces from military districts bordering Ukraine were being sent back to their garrisons. In truth, those garrisons were located close to the border with Ukraine anyway, so their redeployment would not mean a significant shift in geographic or strategic positioning. Still, Moscow appeared to be telegraphing that it was taking a few steps back from the prospect of an invasion of Ukraine. A few steps back from the precipice into the abyss of war was certainly something to welcome, but it was not a guarantee that the threat of war was over. Given this reality, in President Biden's remarks from the East Room of the White House, he made clear that the United States and NATO would not sacrifice basic principles. President Biden also reminded Russia that the United States would stand by NATO countries in the event of an attack on any country in the alliance. The United States president declared an attack against one NATO country is an attack against all of us. The United States' commitment to Article 5 is sacrosanct. Nevertheless, President Biden was signaling that the United States had no desire to create enmity between the United States and Russia. Moreover, President Biden emphasized that he was willing to give diplomacy every chance. Meanwhile, the veracity of Moscow's troop announcement remained an issue of debate. Both the United States and NATO officials observed that they had respectively had seen no signs of de-escalation. In fact, in addition to not seeing signs of de-escalation, was the very record from Russia, as noted by NATO Secretary General General Jens Stoltenberg, Russia has in the past moved its troops around while leaving heavy weapons in place. Still, the claim from President Putin appeared to at least give the impression that a diplomatic exit ramp remained possible. Putin himself said, "We intend to and will strive to reach agreement with our partners on questions that we posed in order to solve them by taking a diplomatic path." Along a related line, I'm also covering the Moscow-Beijing alliance and how it could affect the Ukrainian crisis. With the buildup of Russian troops on the border with Ukraine, there were high anxieties that Russia would invade Ukraine despite diplomatic efforts to avert a war. The major consequences being discussed by the West involved the imposition of harsh sanctions, as well as an end to the proposed Nord Stream 2, the pipeline intended to carry Russian gas to Europe through Germany. But China has offered assistance to Russia, effectively decreasing the level of anticipated economic pain. At issue was the fact that Moscow and Beijing have announced $117.5 billion in new oil and gas deals. As Putin triumphantly declared in the first week of February 2022, our oil men have prepared very good new solutions on hydrocarbon supplies to the People's Republic of China. These new oil and gas deals would not provide immediate relief to Russia, as the new pipeline to China would not materialize for a few years. Nevertheless, the upshot of this Beijing-Moscow alliance was clear. Beijing and Moscow would back each other in opposition to the United States and the West. By offering Russia an economic lifeline, China was effectively increasing the possibility that Vladimir Putin, the Russian leader, would be less concerned about the threat of killing Nord Stream 2. Accordingly, it was far more likely that Russia might defy the West and invade Ukraine. China would also have its own geopolitical impetus for wanting to see Russian encroachment on Ukrainian sovereign territory, as it considers its own ambitions in Taiwan. I'm also covering North Korea. Last week, I covered the fact that analysts at the Center for Strategic and International Studies said that they found located an underground military base in North Korea, a mere 15 miles from the border with China. The strategic location was very likely intended to deter a preemptive strike that could deleteriously affect China. The analysts concluded that the Hojangni base was being used to house North Korean intercontinental ballistic missiles, ICBMs. The discovery of this military base, ostensibly intended to protect North Korea's most powerful weapons from being hit by a preemptive strike, suggests that those more provocative tests might be in the offing. At the broader level, I am also covering the fact that North Korea has continued to forge ahead with its nuclear programs and missile programs despite prevailing international sanctions. As reported by Agence France-Presse, a confidential United Nations report that was shared with 15 members of the United Nations Security Council showed that in the last year, North Korea kept developing its capability for producing nuclear fissile materials. The report also noted that work on North Korea's nuclear and ballistic missile infrastructure continued. Given the pressure North Korea faced for revenue as a result of sanctions, North Korea has relied on cyber attacks, particularly on cryptocurrency assets, as an important source of government revenue. This landscape would suggest there would be a need for even more pressure in the form of draconian sanctions to be imposed on North Korea. But China and Russia have resisted such moves, arguing that there should be an easing of sanctions on the basis of humanitarian concerns. The United States ambassador to the United Nations, Linda Thomas-Greenfield, dismissed this notion, emphasizing that North Korea's dire economic situation was of its own making. She said the number one barrier to sending humanitarian assistance into the DPRK is the DPRK's self-imposed border closures, not international sanctions. Another story I'm also covering this week includes Canada, where Prime Minister Justin Trudeau invoked emergency measures to deal with the truckers' blockade and protests against COVID measures. From late January 2022 through mid-February 2022, the Canadian capital city of Ottawa and border crossing areas with the United States were subject to blockades by truckers opposed to COVID measures implemented to prevent the transmission of the lethal disease. On February 14, 2022, Prime Minister Trudeau invoked the Emergencies Act for the first time in Canada's history in order to end the disruptive protests that had paralysed the capital city of Ottawa and border crossings, and also to freeze protesters' funding. The Emergencies Act would allow the government to impose broad powers to deal with the crisis, albeit on a temporary basis. Among the emergency powers expected to be utilised were the following: prohibitions on public assemblies that breach public peace, designation of venues such as ports and border crossings where blockades were prohibited, designation of essential services such as tow trucks to remove trucks used in the blockade, prohibition of the use of funds via banks or crowdfunding platforms, and use of property to support blockades, enshrining the RCMP with powers to enforce local laws, and imposition of fines and imprisonment for violation of these orders. The Prime Minister emphasised that he was not calling in the military, although he was using emergency powers in a sparing, targeted and temporary manner to end the crisis. To this end, Trudeau said the act is to be used sparingly and as a last resort. In these circumstances, it is now clear that responsible leadership requires us to do this. Subscribers can read more about these and other stories at the Country Watch website at www.countrywatch.com. I'd also like to take this time to mention my comprehensive Afghanistan withdrawal report called Sunset in the Graveyard of Empires, which is available for purchase from the Country Watch website at www.countrywatch.com. Thank you for your time. Have a great day, and remember, now more than ever, we live in an interconnected world.